Hello, everybody. Welcome. Come on in.
There is bipartisan support in both the House and
And we'll invite you to please go ahead and mute yourself as you come in. There will be hopefully some time for us all to participate for those who are interested. But for now, if you wouldn't mind keeping yourself muted, that would be lovely. Welcome, welcome.
Yeah, and we always invite people, if you want and can, to turn your cameras on so we see your reactions when stuff happens, which is fun. So it's like the mic off and the camera on, if possible. That would be good. And we will begin in just a moment or two.
Perfect.
Okay, as people are coming in, welcome once again. It's for us once again an opportunity to welcome everybody to this series of talks that we have had during the last few months. I will give them that.
This is the one. Oh.
You see, I mute everybody. It's the beautiful thing about Zoom. So in the past, we have had these conversations by which we get the chance to learn from insightful folks in the American Jewish world, and also to learn about wonderful organizational institutions here in America. We learned about Adar, and we learned about the Hartman Institute, and today we are bringing a piece of the JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary in New York, here to Nashville, Tennessee, as we are today learning from Rabbi Gordon Tucker, who happens to be right now the Vice Chancellor for Religious Life and Engagement at the JTS. But back in the day, he was the Dean of the Rabbinical School there from 1984 to 1992. That is even before my bar mitzvah, so no chance at all that I was able to study at the JTS at the time. Rabbi was also a pulpit rabbi for many years. And among the wonderful things that he has done, he has translated and edited this book, which is a thick book, which is Heschel's Heavenly Torah, Torah Min HaShamayim Ve'Aspaklaria Shel Adonot, the only book that Heschel wrote in Hebrew. And it's a wonderful, wonderful long book that you can read. And there was no English translation. So we are happy to partner between the Western Synagogue and Congregation Micah and the Federation here in Nashville and Middle Tennessee. And we want to welcome you, Rabbi Gordon Tucker. Thank you for being here with us today. Now, jumping into the conversation, what we have done in the past with every other person that we interviewed is to ask everybody to map for us what you think are the strengths, the weaknesses, the threats, or the opportunities facing contemporary Jewry here in the United States, in particular, in our days. So it's nothing big, I guess. So it's all yours.
Oh, okay. Well, let me say I'm, first of all, very pleased to have had this invitation. This is the closest I've gotten to Nashville. I think the only place I've ever been in Tennessee is in Memphis, which I know is very, very different from Nashville. And I hope to be able to visit in the flesh someday, but it's wonderful to be with you all here. And I think some of you know that it's especially nice to see Bruce and Ellen Wolfson and Elaine Shapiro, who are late of my community up in Westchester County, New York. So it's good to be reuniting with them. So where to begin? I don't know, on strengths. So I think I certainly want to begin with people, and especially young people. So as you heard, I was a student at Jewish Theological Seminary back in the 1970s. I was the dean of the rabbinical school in the mid 80s to early 90s. And I'm back there now, having a lot of contact with the students there. Not just the rabbinical students, by the way, the cantorial students, the graduate students, and the undergraduates who are in our List College. And, you always, your memory is always, a little bit selective, but I have to say, I find the young people who are committing themselves to Jewish studies and to becoming contributing members of the Jewish community, whether as professionals or as lay people, they're a whole lot more impressive and a whole lot more interesting than my cohort was. And even the wonderful people that I had the pleasure of teaching and mentoring back in the 80s. There is a remarkable range of backgrounds that people are bringing to this this enterprise. And when we think about religious leadership, I think we can call it a calling. You cannot spend time with the people who are studying with us now. And I'm just talking right now about a little slice at JTS, but I know from my colleagues that this is happening in other schools as well. Numbers is a different issue, which we will probably get to talk about. But right now I'm ignoring the numbers and just talking about the kind of the quality of the backgrounds, the commitments, the intellectual, both curiosity and intellectual substance that we have there. You cannot be around them without feeling like there is, there's a future that is beckoning, that is going to take us to good places. Today, there is a vitality of Jewish studies in the United States that just keeps getting better and better. You go to the various academic conferences, the kinds of things that you see at the Association with Jewish Studies, the number of people who are producing first-rate scholarship in such a broad range of fields. It's not just what it was once upon a time, Bible, Talmud, Jewish history, Jewish literature. Now it's a much broader range of studies, ranging from all of the above, but gender studies and anthropological studies and many other fields that are is making our shores here into even more of a great producer of Jewish scholarship. One thing that I know that you have talked about the Hartman Institute. One thing that wasn't in my little bio is that I'm also a senior fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute in North America. And everything I just said about JTS carries over to all the people that I have the pleasure of working with at the Hartman Institute, being part of a research group there, now teaching younger fellows there. It's you can't help being impressed with the energy and the talent out there. There is also a kind of Jewish culture and Jewish music in ways that just wasn't even in the same ballpark years ago when I was last at JTS, certainly back in my student days. So there's a real flowering of things, and I think all of these things have to be accounted as among the great strengths and the great assets that we have at our disposal in American Jewish life. I haven't even touched on the emergence of many Jews of color who are making their way into the center of Jewish spiritual and cultural vitality, and all of these things are among the many factors that give me a great deal of optimism day in and day out. This is not to say that we don't have certain weaknesses. One of those weaknesses surely is a very individualistic culture that we have in North America. There is, people have, described it. This description is a few years old, but I think it is, it is still relevant. A kind of the customize your drink culture, right? That everything is, tends to be, people tend to look to tailor things to just what their tastes are, and that comes with what comes with that is a concomitant weakening of what I would call a kind of a social contract among members of the Jewish community, that we are meant to be bound to one another, and to make certain commitments to one another and to take on obligations to one another. That's a little bit, or more than a little bit, countercultural today, and it's not just in the Jewish community, obviously, but that is one of the things that we have to find ways to overcome. I think related to that is, you probably know this or sense this, that whereas for example, my late father-in-law worked for the same company and climbed up the ladder there for something like 55 years. No one does that anymore. And in fact, a lot of young people, by the time they're 35 or 40, they've been in, 7 different positions, and sometimes in different fields, jumping around. And it's not that it's bad for them, but it means that the notion of making a long-term commitment to a particular profession or a particular calling, which I'm saying deliberately, is itself somewhat countercultural. And I think that is one of a variety of factors that has resulted in something that you've no doubt heard about, which is, we're getting to the numbers and the quantity issue. All of the rabbinical schools, just about every single one of them across the board in the different movements, are experiencing a significant drop in the number of people who are going into the rabbinate. And given the talent that I've already pointed to, it really is a big loss not to be able to attract more of them. That's something that we're all getting together to work on. But I think we have to be frank about that. That is at least a temporary weakness. I'm aware of the fact that cultural pendulums tend to swing. Even this individualistic society may surely swing back at some point. But right now we have some work to do. So I think this might be a good place for me to pause, and we can talk about some of the opportunities and the threats that we may face. But let's see if there are some questions from my interlocutors here, or comments or reactions.
Rabbi, thank you so much. I want to jump off and expand a little bit on something you said, which is, well, twofold. I want to speak to kind of the younger Jews within our community that you spoke about. And I also want to kind of come back to this idea of being responsible for one another and committed to one another. I think there was sort of an opening of a window, the eye of the needle expanded a bit during the heart of the pandemic, when we were all isolated and in lockdown, and there was greater maybe attention given to this idea of our spiritual well-being. And we tossed around ideas like, every year we get a physical, it's important that we take a spiritual, and people were taking spiritual assessments of themselves and what it was that they needed. And there was hope, even if it was only on the surface, that perhaps this would carry, we would take it into the world with us when things began to reopen. But here we are. And I think, the lure and pull of autonomy and individualism is strong in our country and in our genes now as Americans. And Judaism in and of itself, I think, runs counterculture to that notion. And I sometimes see with the younger generation of Jews in our community, a desire to connect spiritually and intellectually, but a real resistance to the institutional history of our movements. And I just wonder if you're seeing that we really are going to need to shift as a whole community across the denominations as to how we connect and interact with the Jewish community. I mean, you have an audience on this Zoom that is committed, interested, wants to learn, expand their mind, connect with one another. So it's for all the people that aren't on the Zoom.
Right. But the people who are not on the Zooms and who are not in the synagogues, they are part of us as well, and we don't do well to kind of assume that they are, necessarily less committed in various ways. People have different forms of commitment and living it out. But I think you're absolutely right that there is Judaism has always tried to be countercultural to this individualistic. It's more than a veneer. It's really soaked into our culture. But I don't think it's an either or, right? That is. So let me give you an example that's actually from a text. It happens to be on my mind because I'm going to be doing something with it later this week at the Hartman Institute. The Talmud makes this very odd statement, or it's odd to modern ears anyway, that someone who acts out of a sense of obligation and commandment is somehow ranked higher than someone who does the very same things voluntarily. And that rings so untrue to modern ears. It's like, what do you mean? To do it because you have to do it doesn't seem as good as doing it because you want to do it, right? If you put it in those terms. But I think the real secret to understanding this is that when people take on a certain kind of obligation, whether it's whatever it might be, let's take the simplest thing, an obligation to come with some regularity to the synagogue to help make a minyan. Right. If people know that someone has made a commitment to be there every Monday and Thursday, they know they can count on it. They know that that person will be there for them. It's not just that, oh, it's so nice to see you. Yeah, I woke up this Monday and I felt really spiritual and I felt that I really wanted to come. And that's kind of the voluntaristic side. And of course, there's nothing wrong with that, but it's not fulfilling the social contract. When you get into a contract with anyone, you are, for any reason, and I'm sure there are lawyers on this Zoom right now, you are making a commitment to do things that you may not always feel like doing, but you're contracted to do it. And I think that doesn't necessarily push aside the autonomy that I think we are intended to have in creating Jewish lives for ourselves. But we have to still have that kind of Jewish social contract, which plays itself out in the area of obligation.
I mean, it made me think of two things, and I know it probably wasn't just Jonathan Sacks, may his memory be for a blessing, but the idea of the freedom to, that obligation gives us a freedom to, as opposed to us always thinking about being free from. And I, of course, thought of tzedakah and charity. One is an obligation that then is counted upon, that the community takes care of each other and those who are in need, as opposed to the voluntaristic giving that is at a whim, because your heartstrings are pulled.
Now, go
ahead, please.
No, in similar lines, I was thinking, Hartman used to speak about the covenantal Judaism, or the covenant at the center, that somehow you are talking about bringing it back. in creating a structure that may summon people to a covenant that they will be obligated somehow. It's like it's a voluntary obligation, which again it might be ki emuve kiblu, as the Talmud says that from Sinai to Megillat Esther, that's when they are submitting to a covenant out of their own free will. My question to you would be, what would you say are the basic anchors, the basic themes or values that type of covenant should be grounded in? It's like, what type of Judaism, my question is, what type of Judaism do you envision, or do you think that may be appealing, if you want, and relevant and authentic for most of the liberal Jewish world? Not liberal, not so much in terms of politics, that we could go that way, but there's no need. But in terms of practice, just to to define it positively, and not to say non-Orthodox Judaism, but everything that is in the conservative reform and whatever else in between. What should be those main anchors that may allow us to create that structure, that covenantal structure, for people to be willing to participate?
Yeah. So what I'm about to say, actually, I strongly believe applies as well, not just to these, what you call the non-Orthodox or the liberal streams, but to modern Orthodoxy as well. And that is that I think there is a broadly shared belief, and it has to be strengthened, and it has to be conveyed to our communities, that I'll put it in an acute kind of way. Judaism is going to matter only if it matters, right? That is, everything that you do has to have some connection to making the world a better place for everyone. Otherwise, what's the point? Heschel, who, as you already noted, I spent some time with, not person to person. We only overlapped at JTS by a year when he died. But he used to say, if you're the same person after you've davened that you were before you davened, then what was the point of davening, right? But you can apply that to Jewish living. What's the point of Jewish living if it isn't making some difference? And I think that it's not that any particular ritual that we have or any particular observance is going to immediately connect for you, but the fact that you are doing it together and that you're finding meaning in it. We don't find the same meaning in Shabbat, I don't think, that our ancestors did a long time ago. Shabbat is actually one of those very rare rituals that actually gets more relevant as time goes by. There's probably never been a generation that in the history of the world for whom Shabbat was more relevant and more important than today, with all the ecological issues and everything else that that we have to deal with as residents of this planet. So the fact that we have this, what I've called this contract with one another as a Jewish community to live that way, so that it will spur us on to doing things that improve the world, is really the way to sell it. One or two people I've already mentioned have heard me say this before, but we have this phrase Torah lishma. And it's usually translated, I believe incorrectly, as Torah for its own sake, as if you sit in your study and you do Torah and it has nothing to do with anything else. That's like pure Torah, as opposed to like pure math, as opposed to applied math. Torah lishma is applied Torah. It's Torah for its intended purpose. Torah was given for a certain reason. It wasn't given just so that we would squirrel ourselves away studying it. It was given to make a difference in the world. And that, I think we have to, reconvince ourselves and convince others that this is not the only way, but a powerful way to make that kind of difference.
Well, and as some of you, I know you have your hands up, and we're just going to hold off a little bit. If you feel like your question is just it has to be at this moment, go ahead and message either Rabbi Kulik or myself directly, please. So Rabbi, then Rabbi Kulik had said, what are those values that the Judaism needs to be steeped in? I would expand that to say, are there certain things that every Jewish person who has an interest in being a contributing member of their community must engage in? Is there a certain level of study, a certain level of volunteerism, a certain level? I mean, is in your mind, what is kind of the equation for a member of the Jewish community? I mean, I hesitate to use a phrase that's cliche here in the South, but we often hear, oh, he or she is a good Christian. Well, what makes us a good Jew?
Probably some of the same things that make a Christian a good Christian, right? That is, look, our Jewish canon is filled with this. We're supposed to imagine what all the godly qualities are. What are the things that we really believe we should be in awe of, and we have all these attributes that tell us that, right? That being merciful, being compassionate, being standing for justice, and being firm about that when you need to be firm about it, being uncompromising with people who are enemies of justice. All of those things are qualities that we attribute to God, and we are asked to imitate them. We are asked to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a really complicated thing, when you put it that way. And too often, I think, we lose sight of that. Like there's our everyday life, and then there's our Shabbat life, right? But we want to be uniquely Jewish in our expression of those qualities, right? I mean, we don't want to be just good people. We want to also be good members of the Jewish community who are also members of the larger world community. Yes, but we have our own art form. It's called Judaism, right? And it is what leads us to and reminds us of those qualities that we want to cultivate in ourselves and in our community. I think it's important to state it in this kind of way so that we don't become chauvinistic and we don't imagine that somehow we are better for the world than good Christians or good Muslims are. Mm-hmm. Good people are good for the world, right? And there are different paths for reinforcing that on a day-to-day basis. We have ours. We should be loyal to it in part because of not only the contract that I've talked about among the people who are alive today, but the contract with the generations, mm-hmm. right? We owe it to those who came before to give them a kind of an afterlife by carrying on, the art form that they helped to create, which is a vital art form for the world.
Yeah.
So again, let me digress for a moment. I will tell you a story. I think that we are talking about different ways to frame the same conversation, but back when I was young and I was recently ordained from rabbinical school, I stayed in Israel to go to the now extinct senior educator program at the Hebrew University. For this program, I wanted dearly to have a mentor who is also from Argentina, but actually studied at the JTS, and he wrote his dissertation on the successful failure that Camp Ramah is. And he was an anthropologist of education. And I knocked at his door and said, I want to write with you. And I would love to write my project. You had to write a yearly project, a thesis of sorts. about the need for conservative Judaism in that case was for developing a new Agadah, a new narrative, a new theoretical framework to get people involved. And he said to me, nonsense. What you need to do is to work on some sort of a framework that will get people to build a community of practice, that will get people to do. Not a theoretical framework, but a framework of praxis. So I wrote all my dissertation of Halacha as a language, which was very interesting to me. I still think whether we need today, in order to face contemporary Judaism, contemporary American Jews, do we need to develop a new Agadah, a new narrative or framework of engagement, or do we have to spend our time, resources, and ideas and creativity in creating communities of praxis that will get people to do specific things? So what is your take on that? It's like, not for, big trends, congregational life. Okay, you've been a congregational rabbi. We are serving congregations here. What do we need to invest our time and resources? In the development of a narrative, or in the development of a concrete set of, this is what we need to do, period?
My response to that is, I think it's a false dichotomy. I think that one without the other is impossible. I don't remember the exact words that Heschel used when he was asked about this, but he said something like, Agadah without halacha is wild, meaning you can't nail it down. It can go anywhere. And halacha without Agadah is soulless. It doesn't have a soul. So, the great jurist Robert Cover, of blessed memory, famously said, for every constitution there is an epic. Anytime there is a legal structure that people agree to create, there's a reason for it. There's some story behind it. There is something that you're trying to create in society, and that's why you've created this constitution. We too often think about, I'll give you another little text here. The Torah begins, Breshit bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et haaretz. And you, my rabbinic colleagues here, know very well that when God began to create the heavens and the earth, it's the beginning of the story. Rashi, the great exegete from the 11th century, the first thing he says is, what is this? The Torah's here to teach us laws. Why are we getting stories? And then he has to give an answer to it. But just think about where that question is coming from. Rashi has already had imbued in him, what was imbued for 1,000 years already, that Judaism is law. And therefore, if the Torah doesn't start with law, that's an eyebrow raiser, and you got to answer the question, what are these stories doing here? But that's an arbitrary thing, right? No one wrote beforehand at the beginning, Judaism is about law. Judaism is, to borrow Mordechai Kaplan's term, is a civilization, and civilizations have laws, but they also have narratives. They also have epics. They also have folklore. They also have philosophies and values. And if these things cannot be combined, and if they can't be in dialogue with one another, if they can't challenge one another, right? Why do we have a lot of LGBT students now studying for the rabbinate, and I have to tell you, I feel like there's a special spirituality there. I don't mean to be stereotyping, but I see it. There's a spirituality that's been unleashed there in that community. They wouldn't be there if we weren't able to kind of challenge the precedents of the rules on the basis of the values and the principles of human dignity and God being compassionate to everyone and loving of everyone. So these things have to be in dialogue, and I just don't accept the idea that we have to choose between doing one or the other.
I agree. It's like, we studied God in Search of Man here at West End last year. Heschel builds that, he has that that style that is beautiful. I think that he's building actually upon a text that Bialik wrote about the same too.
Yes.
But
One
if
is
you
the
remember,
flower and the other is the fruit.
correct. But at the
Right.
end of that text, Bialik actually says that, and this is interesting because it was written over 100 years ago, that he's criticizing his generation because there is a lot of emphasis on the Agadah that is devoid of any halacha. And he doesn't understand halacha as the Shulchan Aruch. He understands halacha as a set of practices that embody those values, which probably my concern is in some of the challenges, to go back to the beginning of the conversation, for contemporary Judaism, about developing not only a framework that is appealing in terms, intellectually appealing, which I think there is plenty of that, but somehow there is a challenge in the translation of that theoretical framework into concrete actions that will anchor us. That in which, again, it's Bialik is saying this about a completely different Jewish community in a different century, in a different continent, but there is an interesting tendency of having wonderful narratives that we are not finding the ways of translating those into that world of engagement, whether it is with the outside world, with the concerns of the city where we live, and also in the strengthening of our particular Jewish identities.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you even a more homely example of it. Just think about tefillah. Just think about prayer. If we didn't have a siddur, and I know there are different siddurim, but each community has a siddur. If it didn't have a siddur, people couldn't really pray together. There'd be different, a lot of individuals could be in the room. They'd all be saying whatever they want to say. We have to have something that anchors us, to use your term, as a community, and reminds us that we are part of a common destiny. But if that's all that we have, then Rabbi Eliezer already told us that back in the time of the Talmud, that if you make your prayer into a fixed thing, it's not really prayer.
Mm.
So there too, in a simpler level, we have to train people both to respect the traditions that anchor us together, but also to be able to let their souls soar a little bit and imagine where this kind of energy of the community can take us and how it can be used to make God's world a better place.
I feel like no better definition of conservative Judaism has ever been spoken. But it really is not just conservative Judaism. I think that's the evolving nature of what Judaism has been and needs to continue to be. We need to be, I think the fixed is that we have to be able to recognize one another. And that's what the fixed lets us do. And the open heart to soar, the creativity, is the relevance, the evolving relevance of Judaism from one generation to the next. And that's what I hope will be attractive to the younger generation of Jews. But
Yes.
I think we have to not be fearful of teaching or exposing both elements, the fixed, which I think we sometimes tap dance around, or tiptoe around is a better way to say it. That can be liberating as well. The fixed is not inhibiting, it's liberating too. I want to shift our conversation a little bit, because I'm curious, Israel has played a different role for different generations of Jews at different times, right? You have folks, members of the Jewish community alive today, who remember very well what it was like to live when there was no Israel, and recognize it every single day as a modern miracle, and so incredibly important and anchoring for the Jewish people worldwide. And on the opposite end of that spectrum, and then of course, everything in between, are folks who don't think Israel is important for a vitality of a worldwide Jewish community, or certainly not an American Jewish community, and in fact can be can be serve as a threat to the strength of our community. And I'm just curious what kind of trajectory you see
Yeah,
for us
I
as
never,
American Jews vis-a-vis our relationship with Israel.
I never thought, I'm going to be just totally open and frank with you here, because this question immediately makes me sad.
Yeah.
I never thought that I would list Israel under the heading of threats, right? Well, what I mean by threat is what Israel once was in my life. First of all, I should say that just counting myself as someone who believes that it's important to be critical of anything when it needs to be criticized, and Israel is just one of those things. So I'm sometimes critical of Israeli policies, but because of my vintage, I remember May of 1967. Right, I remember being out on the streets of Manhattan with a pushka, raising money for this state that we were sure and fearful might go under at any moment. That's never going to be washed out of me, right? But I can't expect people who were born in the 1990s to have that feeling. They don't. And there's no reason why, there's no reason in their lifetime why they should remember that kind of vulnerability, right? It makes us somewhat different. But Israel was something that, and maybe we were a little Pollyannish about it when I was younger, but I think there was real substance to it. Israel was a place that was, you thought of as a real model, something that you looked up to, something that you took enormous pride in. And you could point to it as something that really was different in important ways from so much of the world, in nice ways and in good ways. And let me hasten to add, there's all sorts of wonderful, good people in Israel, and there are all sorts of good things that are happening not so far beneath the surface. When I was a congregational rabbi in White Plains, we used to, for many years, every other year, we would take our 11th and 12th graders to Israel for a week, and we would be sure to show them and to take them around, not to the typical tourist things, but to the people who wear kippot and are working for Bedouin rights, and the people who are making sure that children everywhere, even if they come from places like Afghanistan, if they need heart surgery, are going to be able to get it there. We wanted them to see the Israel that they could be proud of and that they could take to their college campuses and not have to feel that they were just boxed into a corner to defend a government policy, that they could defend an entire society. And I think in many ways that's still the case. And that, that gives me hope. But at the same time, I'm just going to say it straight out. We just saw this. This is a fact. 12.5% of the Israeli electorate just voted for an openly racist party. And many others who didn't vote for them are sort of okay with it. And, you have a man who was not deemed fit to be in the IDF is now the police minister, right? He was considered too dangerous to be in the army years ago when he would have been eligible for army service, and now he's going to be. So Israel is for our young people now, it's becoming more of a burden. How are they going to point to it as a place that represents the best of Jewish values, right? Those Jewish values are there, as I said, not so far beneath the surface, but that's not what the world sees. And that's not the rhetoric that we're hearing. And, we're hearing a lot of misogyny. We're hearing a lot of totalism and maximalism when it comes to religious policy that excludes all of us on this screen. We're hearing a lot of homophobia. And that's, that's the government that's been formed now. And I can't not see that as posing, as being, a dark cloud right now for what our young people in the United States are going to be, the burden they're going to be carrying. I'm sorry that I have to be this candid, but I think if we're going to be honest with each other, I have to tell you how I feel. And what I see even in people who are committed to Jewish life, or especially people who are committed to Jewish life because they're committed to the Jewish values that they feel are not being played out in the place that should be playing it out more than anywhere else. That's why I'm sad.
Yeah, I think we join you in that feeling.
Is there
For sure.
anything we can do about it? Or, it's given that Israelis get to vote for their government, but what is to be done on this side of the,
I'm not saying it's illegitimate, it is a democracy. They democratically voted for it, but that doesn't change the nature of it.
no,
Right.
but so I'm worried for all these young kids who, this is what they get. And is there anything we can do from our places, from our communities or congregations to kind of still instill in our congregants, in our youth, this love for Israel that is pretty much at the heart of our rabbinate and of, probably all the choir that is here on this call.
Yeah. Well, I think we have to, there are things that we can do in terms of connecting our young people with young people in Israel who are part of this civil society there that I mentioned, who are not, are not responsible for some of the, less than attractive things that are will be going on the government level, the things that will continue going on, and in terms of human rights and women's rights and immigrant rights and Jewish vitality, the kinds of things that the Reform and the Masorti movements do to engage people in Jewish life, even if they're considered now by people who are going to be in the government, who are going to be, who are going to be denigrated as heretics and as sectarians and who knows what. I mean, we've heard all of these slanders before, but these people are doing God's work when, by the way, across political lines. I mean, there's, certainly on the Masorti movement, which I know very well, you've got Likud people in there and you got labor people in there, but they're all committed to a vital, thriving Jewish life in Israel that is not Orthodox and doesn't have to be Orthodox. So getting particularly our young people in touch with all of those sectors of Israeli society that will enable them to ease some of this burden that the elections are surely going to bring our way is going to be part of the antidote. They're going to be able to. I was always worried about what happens when they go off to college campuses, and what they're confronted with is a kind of a rhetoric which is not particularly honest, of course, a rhetoric about a state of all its citizens, and we shouldn't have a Jewish state. It should be we shouldn't have an Arab state. Everyone should be all together, and kumbaya. And the alternative to that is a right-wing government in Israel. And what kind of a choice is that for our young people? The more they know about what actually happens in Israeli society on a day-to-day basis, not in the halls of government, but in the hospitals and in the youth villages. And I don't know if you probably know about the youth village Yamin Ord, who do so much good for youth at risk in Israel that they created a whole model for that was exported to Rwanda to help the children survivors of the genocide there. I mean, these are things that are not governmental things. These are the NGOs. This is civil society. The more people understand that and more people are in touch with that, the the light of the burden will be to have to be called upon to defend Israel. It'll be easier to defend.
So thank you, Rabbi. And I know that we have some folks who had questions. We only have about 10 minutes or so here. One person asked about, just because you mentioned it, the issue of Israel and college campus, and that it's not just what our students are encountering amongst their student peers, but also what's going on amongst administration and faculty members as well. And back to Rabbi Kolek's question of what can we be doing? What can we be doing? I mean,
well, part of what we can be doing is things that I've said in the last couple of minutes. I don't believe the way to do this is to give Jewish students a playbook. There are organizations that specialize in this, and I'm not saying that it's entirely wrong. I just don't think it's the best approach to give them the ammunition that when they say X, you say Y, right? And you counter it with some historical fact. That I don't think that really does the job. What you have to be able to do is talk about the depths of the society there and the good that happens every single day. And it gets you away from the government being the center of attention. I think the other thing is to recognize that I'll tell you what, when I was on a college campus in Boston, and I say Boston because it was all the campuses in Boston at the time, in the late 60s, there was a lot of anti-Israel, pro-Arab propaganda on campus. One of the big differences, so it's not like this is the first time this has happened.
right.
What's different, of course, is, as in so many other areas of life, is social media amplifies everything, gets people out faster. I mean, there's all of that, which is true, and not to be ignored. But we should also not ignore the enormous amount of positive things that happen for Jews on college campuses. I mean, when I was in college, I was told, we don't really care that you're paying us for the food that you don't eat in the cafeteria, and you're expected to do that because if you didn't want to eat the university's food, you didn't have to come to the university, right? It was worse than that. It was, if you people didn't want to eat our food, you people didn't have to come here. You don't hear that today, right? You go to Barnard's. People talk about Columbia Barnard. Yes, there's BDS stuff, and there's all of that stuff that goes on at college campuses, but there's also a thriving kosher kitchen there at Barnard. And, an enormous amount of, Jewish culture that thrives at the university. So we shouldn't paint the universities as these dark dungeons. They have issues that have to be confronted. But we shouldn't lose sight of a lot of the positive things that happen there as well.
Thank you. Avi, I think you had a question. I'm not sure. I can't remember if it's relevant at this stage.
Yeah, my question goes back to the conversation on a social compact among in the Jewish community. Do we think we have a social contract? Do we need one? Can we create one? Coupled with Joshua's suggestions on actions? I know we do a lot of good things, there's no question. But do our young people look at our Jewish community in Nashville and identify us as having a shared compact?
No, it's a really good question. When I was talking about this kind of contract, I was talking in somewhat theoretical terms, not that it doesn't happen, but I think you're right that we don't have a good definition of exactly what it is and what it entails. And that might be an interesting project to be taken on. I'm not sure exactly by whom and how it would be taken on, but we have a lot of precedents for that, right? In the Tanakh, there were britot, there were covenants that were created, and there's actually a rather detailed one. I'm not saying that it's word for word what we would want today, but at the end of the book of Nehemiah, that's one of those books that people keep on their night tables when they have trouble falling asleep. No one reads these books, but they're actually part of the Tanakh, and it's early Second Temple times. And there's a description there of a covenant that they created in which there were all sorts of Article 1, Article 2, Article 3. People are going to commit to, observing Shabbat in the following way. People are going to commit to, supporting the poor in the following way. Maybe there's some place now for trying to define what that contract with one another should look like. I think that's an interesting suggestion.
Thanks, Abby. Bruce and Ellen.
Thank you, Rabbi. So good to see you. Just picking up on that social contract, a cantor whom you know in England gave a sermon last weekend where she was talking about how young people who don't join synagogues and don't commit to communities do join communities like Peloton and CrossFit, where they find spiritual commitment and personal growth and make a commitment to a community where they know they're joining not just to be members, but where they know they have to work and put into it, and ask the question as to what we can learn and why we're not seeing those same people make that same kind of spiritual commitment to Jewish religious institutions.
Yeah.
Love to hear your thoughts.
Well, I'm gonna quote a rabbi whom you know, who once said to our congregation that his mother said to him when he was going into the rabbinate, when I go hiking in the woods, I have about a 95% chance of having a spiritual experience. I have found that when I go to the synagogue, I have about a 5% chance of having a spiritual experience. So you do the arithmetic, she said to her son going into the rabbinate. So obviously an exaggeration, but not entirely devoid of some truth. I don't know what people get out of the Peloton community, and I gather that Peloton has peaked, right? But people, and this has been documented as a culture-wide thing. That very well-known book, Bowling Alone, that Robert Putnam wrote about how people are not joining, people don't join things, and that is true. But they do look for some spiritual sustenance, and that means that responsibility and that burden is on the synagogues to make sure that it's not just a rote thing of the liturgy that's there, but that there is space for what I called before the soaring of the soul, and that's the only way we're going to be able to to break through that.
I think it's interesting too, if I may, Bruce, because a community, and you use Peloton as an example, but any kind of athletic community or other is wonderful for the high that it provides, but I don't know how present it is when there's the lows or the life transitions, or the crevasse that we have to go down into before we can come back up, and who's waiting for us there at the bottom to help us walk back up. And so, and people may figure that out on their own, that it only meets so many needs. But I'm not sure. So, Jane, I think, Gergis, that you had your hand up once upon a time, and I just want to make sure that if you had a question still that was burning, that you had an opportunity to ask. Okay, may not be with us anymore on this Zoom. Judith, thank you. Okay, so this is just she's typing in the chat. Okay, well, so while Judith is communicating with me directly, does anybody, thanks Judith. Okay, perfect. I just didn't want to miss you if we needed to be. Do we have any last question for Rabbi Tucker before we let him get on with his East Coast 1 hour later evening? Sue Hochberg, I see you. You're doing the old school hand raise. You have to unmute.
I see something in the chat that deserves an answer. Why is Israel the only country expected to be perfect? There are ups and downs in all societies. Oh, there sure are. And I don't want to go be put on record as saying that Israel has to be perfect. It isn't. It won't be. Nothing will be. United States is not. But the point I was making is that it is drifting away in its public image from the things that many consider to be kind of core Jewish values of compassion, of humility, of recognizing the humanity in everyone. And that just creates a problem for our young people. I can deal with it. Maybe you can deal with it, because we know enough about Israel and its history to be able to say, nevertheless, this is a place that I love. But I can't assume that the 22-year-olds are going to be able to do that. And remember, the 22-year-olds don't remember May of '67 the way I do. So that's really the point here. It's not expecting Israel to be perfect. It's not a double standard. It's not any of those things. This is important to us because it's our place, right?
Rabbi, I just don't want to overlook that Shalom put a question in the chat twice. I think it's directed towards you. I mean, I could answer it, but I think she would prefer the answer to come from you with regards to, can you see it? It says, I'm an African-American, have been studying and considering conversion since about 2015, working with the Jewish Federation of Nashville. Go ahead.
Yeah, I see that. Are proselyte Jews, Jews by choice, are they a way to strengthen the Jewish community in the face of attrition among born Jews? Look, yes, right. First of all, I mentioned the differences that I see at JTS, where I work now, from the old days when I was a student there, and when I was teaching there, and in my pre-congregation days in the 80s. It's not at all unusual to have people who were not born Jews studying to be cantors and studying to be rabbis and studying to be Jewish educators, and in PhD programs in Jewish studies. We have them all, and they bring an enormous energy and an enormous spiritual energy with them. I'm often envious of it. As a rabbi, whenever I officiated, so to speak, at a conversion, a bet din and an immersion in a mikveh, I always had this envy, because I sensed there was a deep excitement there, being able to point to something and say, that's what I want for my life. And I never got to do that. I was born into it, right? I think I've, done the best I can with being Jewish, but it's not the same as that kind of energy that people who have come to Judaism at some point in their life, and they are not only do they are they not considered to be somehow lesser than anyone else. They, I think, are more and more recognized as an enormous asset to the community.
I agree. Okay, last question.
Blessings for you, and hatzlacha, and great success.
Thank you, Rabbi. Okay, last question. Sue?
Thank you, Lori. I got to be fully transparent here. I am Rabbi Lori's mother, but I'm also the immediate past chairman of the board of Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion. So first of all, I want to commend you right, Tucker, for saying that we are working together in terms of attracting more rabbis into all of our movements. The idea of just working together warms my heart in so many ways, as you can imagine.
Yeah.
To Ms. Miller, who just asked the question about Jews of color, I want you to know that the assistant to our dean on our Los Angeles campus is a Jew of color. We welcome you with open hearts and open hands. Please look to us, because we feel we are the wave of bringing everybody together. And the fact that we can work together with JTS and all of our colleagues is a very, very important part of what we all do.
Mom,
Amen.
did you have a question?
Oh, I was saying thank you, Lori, because this just warmed my heart.
Okay.
Very nice. On that happy family note, we want to once again thank Rabbi Gordon Tucker. We hope to have you here in the flesh. We had your son here visiting us a couple of years ago, but you know, it's like if the son was able to come, the father should come too. And in the meantime, we want to thank you. And one of the ways, you know, how this is going to work, I don't know if for Rabbi Rice, this is your day off, but it is for me, my day off. And we came for this program because, you know, sometimes you go out of your way when something interesting happens. So maybe you don't have to do the Peloton thing, but when you can offer something that is meaningful and thoughtful and engaging, and we can do it together in partnership, celebrating our differences and also the many things that we have in common, you know, people come and we can learn all together. So thank you, Rabbi, for being here with us.
Thank you.
It was a pleasure, a privilege, and I wish that they were possible to meet everyone who was here, but I enjoyed spending the time with you.
Thank you so
Rabbi
much.
Tucker.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.